Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
It's Dr. Mike Patterson, your host of the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about what it takes to be a great leader and how to build a great team. Today, we're going down under to speak to organizational change expert Karen Simmons. Karen is based in the beautiful city of Sydney, Australia, but has led complex change initiatives across Australia, the UK, Europe, Asia Pacific, and the good old United States for the last 30 years. So I'm excited to bring a truly international perspective to today's conversation. Karen inspires leaders and teams to positively transform and builds capability with an innovative, outcome-focused, and inclusive approach. Through her work with a multitude of leaders, she has demonstrated that she knows what it takes to transform businesses from the inside out. Karen heads an organizational change agency in Sydney that provides organizational development advisory services, coaching, and facilitated learning experiences. And I must say, her firm is housed in one of the greatest spaces I've ever seen. It's very intentionally designed for leaders and teams to use as a place to dream, think, and collaborate. Karen, all the way from Sydney, welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast.
Oh, thank you, Mike. And it's so great to be here. And thank you for that introduction.
Well, it's good to have you. Now, you call yourself a change enthusiast. Now, how can anyone, you or anyone else for that matter, be enthusiastic about change? Change is hard, and people generally don't like it, perhaps because somebody always seems to lose. So how can you be enthusiastic about all that tough stuff?
That's a great opening question. I think it's because humans are wired to change. We're good at it. We adapt to all these different circumstances around us. And, I think if we lean into it, we can walk with our fear rather than be fearful. What's the worst that can happen? One of the things that I do with my clients and sometimes with my coachees is play a game of what's the worst that can happen. And normally it doesn't. So I think sometimes we fear it because of what might go wrong. And we don't actually look forward and go, you know what, this could be fun. This could be different. Let's just step in.
Yeah, we tell ourselves stories, and oftentimes the stories we tell ourselves are pretty dark stories, but not very likely to happen. But I don't know what that is about human nature that causes us to do that. Now, you have a unique take on the structure of organizations. Tell us a little bit about how you see the present state of organizational design or structure.
So my take on organizations are that they're complex, dynamic communities. They're more like living organisms than they are boxes with stuff and people in them. And I think that's really important from a change management perspective. If you see an organization as a messy, complex, hunk of communities with lots of connections happening, with lots of informal as well as formal structures, then we need to take a different approach to change.
And those complex communities are filled with people and relationships, and people and relationships are complicated. We know that.
Yeah. And on top of that, they're operating in a dynamic environment. So the context is changing, right? So the context around us is changing as well. So what may have seemed right yesterday, something may have changed in our context. We don't have to talk about COVID because let's not, but that's what happens. The context is shifting. So what was right yesterday may not be right today.
Now, I believe intentionally use the word community. Oftentimes folks here in this country say, oh, my coworkers are like my family. We have a family type office here. Community and family are different things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, communities, I use the word tribe, right? So communities are people that share the same belief, or they share the same understanding of a situation. And it isn't just the job they do, but it's really what's beneath the surface and what they believe in. A family, you don't really get a lot of choice with who's in your family. And so those clashes of beliefs are often very prevalent, but they are different things. I agree with you. I think communities have a shared purpose and they have a shared understanding of something. It may be the work, right? So a community may be a community of project managers or a community of change managers, and that may be the thing that binds us. So I think they are different. I agree with you.
We often say that change is inevitable. You said early in our conversation that humans are built for change. We can adapt, but nevertheless, it's not easy sometimes. And I think there's some evidence to suggest that most change management efforts fizzle out and don't achieve the results that were originally intended. Why is that, Karen?
So from my experience, the reason change management efforts fizzle out, as you say, is we take too long and we dwell in our fears. So actually what we do is we build fear rather than diminish the fear. One of the words that change management industry uses a lot is resistance. We spend a lot of time on fighting resistance. Why are people resistant to this change? They don't resist change. They fear it, and we have to diminish the fear. So that and to do that, that's not dwelling in it and making it even more scary. That's actually moving on with positivity and very forward-focused language to help us do that. And that, to me, is one of the key reasons that they fail. We just take too long, and the fear gets bigger, and it becomes unsafe to change. Safety is the other factor for me. If an organization does not fundamentally have a safe environment where people can speak out about their fears, then that's when we hit a brick wall. That's when things happen. But resistance is a force has to happen for someone to be resistant. And so that's when we need to ask ourselves, how much force are we applying here? And what type of force are we applying? Just to use a Star Wars analogy, are you being Darth Vader or are you being Yoda? There's two types of forces, right? There's the positive force to take you forward, and then there's that dark side as well. So I always talk to leaders about, just think about how much force you're putting on and whether this is a safe environment for which people can express their fears and we can deal with them.
What is it that people fear? You've been doing this a long time. You've maybe seen it all, heard it all. And we've already acknowledged that most of the time, the worst thing that can happen isn't as bad as what we imagine. But what do people fear when they hear about a change? And I can imagine, a senior leader, all hands meeting, a bunch of people in a big conference room. When we were able to gather in big conference rooms, we're all together. Maybe it's on a Zoom meeting these days, and she announces that we're going in a different direction. What are some of the things that immediately come into people's minds that you have to work through with them once things get going?
Really good question and placement there, because I think, first of all, there's two things going on. So the first is the change. And for me, the change is an external shift in our circumstances. So that could be something that's planned. Now, let's think of that leader. They've planned it. They know it. They're prepared for it. Change could also be emergent. It can happen like COVID over time, or it can come as a complete shock. And from my experience over here in Australia in 2019, we had bushfires, and my property where I am was directly impacted by those. And whilst even I kind of knew it was coming, we have these amazing apps that tell you fire's coming, it's coming in your direction. it didn't really prepare me for the shock. So, but change is the shift in circumstance. The second element is the transition, and that's that human psychological process that we go through to adjust to a change. And they are two things. So the human psychological process, as we know through the growth curve, the grief curve, is that people deny up until the point that they know it's coming. They go past the shock and they move into the next state of the curve, which is where we start to get all of those emotions. So there's a transition, an inner journey of change that's going on for everyone. And that's so different for people. And companies, for me, that fail to recognize the inner journey of change, in my 30 years experience in this game, if they don't recognize that, then they may get change that's complied with, but they'll never succeed in long-term sustainable change and really true transformation.
I've always been a fan of Dr. William Bridges' work, his famous book, Managing Transitions. And one of the things that I recall that he speaks to so wisely is the need to acknowledge that we are letting go of some things in order to take on some new things, and kind of recognizing and even celebrating that letting go, making sure people know that what we're losing are things that we valued at one time. We respect those things. We're honoring that experience that people have, but yet we are letting go. Have you had that same experience, or do you see it the same way?
Absolutely. Yeah. William Bridges, big fan of the work there from the transitions perspective. That letting go, we don't spend enough time celebrating what was. And also we don't talk openly about it, because that's the force that I was talking about, right? When you're in the top seat, when you're in the leadership position, you've gone beyond that. It may have even been a shock to you when you first heard it, but you're over there, right? You've already let go. Maybe you've had those closed door meetings where you've already gone through the kind of letting go and accepting we're into the next horizon, but those behind you haven't. So one of the challenges is that people are in different stages. So William Bridges talks about letting go, and then he talks about this sort of transition phase, and I think refers to it as the wilderness, where that's the bit we all get a bit lost, a bit confused. And then we get to acceptance. Then we get to where we go, right, I get this. But that's happening at different stages for different people as the change starts to trickle through and people need to understand it. So that's what we struggle with. My approach is to get ahead of the curve and to keep changes constant in your organization.
Yeah, I think the metaphor that I recall, and it's probably from Bridges' work, is that of a very large marathon. The starting point of a marathon, the starting gun fires, and all of the elite runners from Africa are sprinting ahead of the rest of the weekend warriors. And by the time some of the folks at the very back of the pack cross that starting line, the elite runners are halfway to the finish line or further. And that trickle down effect of information isn't terribly helpful at times. That's what I recall. And I think that is the experience in many organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't avoid that all the time. You just have to accept that is what's happening around us. So, we talk about change management. I'm not sure you can actually manage change. You can navigate it. And
what's the difference, Karen? That's an interesting use of language. And I know you're always really precise in how you use words. And we hear all the time about change management initiatives, and people go to change management courses. But you just said we don't really manage change. We have to figure out how to navigate it. Tell us a bit about that.
Okay. So here's the thing. Change is messy, right? It's not linear. Your beautiful analogy there of the race, it's all happening at different times. People are in the race for different reasons. There's stuff going on. And if you think about management as a way of trying to kind of control and put one foot in front of the other, management works in a static state where you need to kind of keep the same thing happening. But change is messy and it's different. So let me give you an analogy, if I may. So you set sail on a beautiful, let's just imagine we've got a nice boat and a nice yacht, but we set sail on a beautiful day towards that tropical island over there. It's great. Your friends are all with you. They're all in the boat with you. You're having a great time. Halfway through the journey, the weather turns and it blows you off course. And so here's what happens. Your friends now get concerned. Some of them want to turn back. Others say, it's all good, it'll pass. Others leave it to you. You're the leader. We're going to follow your lead. This happens all the time in organizations. And I have actually been in that boat, having lived in Papua New Guinea many times. You set sail and it's beautiful weather and then it happens. So to navigate change, you need to be prepared, but it's not just in terms of having a map. And for me, I think about that, like the map is the plan, right? But you need to be prepared for the terrain that you're going to be traveling over. So where's it likely to get bumpy? What's the worst that can happen if we did this? That's that game I talked about. What's the worst that can happen? You can't manage or control everything. We spend way too much time on crafting the map, i.e. the change management plan. And we don't spend enough time just on traversing the terrain and getting in and navigating and working out what's happened and listening to the reactions. We need to kind of listen more and be much more alert to our conditions. Does that make sense to you, Mike?
Yeah, I love that metaphor. I've not heard that before, and that's I think that's right on. And as you were describing it, I was thinking about the few people that seem to be asleep below deck, and then the boat starts to rock a little bit, and they wake up and stick their heads out and start screaming about how dangerous things are. Mm-hmm. But there are people like that. Karen, one of the things we do on this show is try to bust biases and shoot down inaccurate myths and bring truth to people. That's what this podcast is all about. What are some myths about change management? And we've already decided that that's probably not a great term, but what are some myths about change that you want to bust for us today? Okay.
Here's one I'd love to bust. That leaders need a script to follow to stay on message. Now, I'm coming from a point of experience here myself. I have written scripts for leaders to follow on major change efforts. And this is what happens. They use the right language in the script. So I know, for example, that if you use the word we, together, we've got a vision, we're going on this journey together, it's all about us, this is the bright future, yada, yada. They say the right things. As soon as they step off the platform, if their language turns back to they haven't done this, behind closed doors, we're just going to do this exclusively, and then we're going to tell people what's happening. Well, you know what? People don't believe you. They won't believe the script, effectively, is what I'm saying. And even from your own book, Mike, my favorite chapter is the bit on people are watching, and they're always watching. They are listening and they are using their own brains to kind of think about whether this is true or not true. So any kind of change effort that requires someone else to write you a script, if you're a change expert, you know what the script needs to say. The problem is it's not me delivering it. So I do think that the mantra of change managers nowadays having to write scripts and messages for leaders, it's like, if you don't know what the story is of the change that you're about to talk about, forget it.
So it has to be authentic. Is it okay for leaders to share that, transparently share that they might be a little uncomfortable at times as well, and there's they might be a little uncertain about things. Is that kind of authenticity welcome? Is that appropriate?
Yeah.
What do you tell them?
Yeah, 100%. That, I think that's an Australian phrase, 100%.
No, we say it here too.
You say it there too? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Bit of vulnerability, just we're not all perfect and we don't have all the answers. And maybe you've not led this size of change before. And I think being authentic and being true to who you are, I often use the term, just be you. Because if you're not you, others, they will see that you're someone else when you stand on the stage. If you don't believe what you're saying, don't say it. So often what I do now is just provide a few kind of like a storyboard, a few bullet points or dot points that just sort of says, this was the story, but you need to now make that yours.
Yeah.
Do you?
If you can't do yourself well, you're probably going to be no good at being other people either. So do you well. Okay, that was one bias. Any others? We're going to knock several out today, I think.
Okay, so next myth, that change management is all about the people side of change. That's not the case. It's not the case at all. Often the smallest change to a system or a protocol or a policy is what is needed to enable you to unblock some of the resistant forces that you may be feeling. So it isn't always all about people. Again, we put a lot of effort, and especially us learning and development folk, we put a lot of people effort in and a lot of care about making sure that people are cared for. But if the system within which people are operating is clearly broken, or they don't have the tools to deliver what you're asking them to, then it's not about the people, is it? So the change has to be much more around that people, processes, performance, systems, tools. It's all of the capabilities. It isn't just the people capabilities.
And it's really what I often preach in my work. It's about balancing people, performance, and process in order to achieve the outcome you're looking for. You can't lean too heavily into one and ignore other aspects of organizational life and work and expect to get where you want to go.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly right. And that comes to my third myth then, really, which is stick to the plan. It worked last time, it'll work again. Forget it. Organizations are those complex, dynamic communities. What you did last year in another context won't work in this one. Don't stick to your plan, but be disciplined in your execution. So I think there's a difference between sticking to a plan.
Tell us what that difference is. That's an intriguing way to say that. In fact, say that again, Karen, so everybody hears it, and then tell us what you mean by what you said.
Okay, so don't stick to your plan, but be disciplined about your execution. What I mean by that is that actually what we need to do is we need to have the map, the plan, but the real trick is to being alert and being switched on and always on to the context you're operating in. So it actually means be disciplined about listening more, be disciplined about taking on board feedback and making a decision to change your plan. And that comes back to my terrain and the territory again, that actually sometimes you do need to go off course. It doesn't mean that you won't get to the end of this journey, but what it means is that you need to do that because that's the right thing to do right now. And you can only do that if you're really disciplined. So for me, discipline is different to sticking to a plan. And that might mean, making sure that you are very disciplined about asking questions, how people are feeling about it. Do they understand what's happening? How's the performance tracking? Is what we're doing getting us closer to where we want to be, or actually is it doing nothing? An example I can give you there, it's like, if you get fixated on employee engagement scores, for example, and say we need to get to 90%, all right, we need to get our engagement to 90%, and you hit the 90% and everyone is ecstatic and excited. You've hit the 90%. And then here comes Karen. She's like, the downer on the situation. And she says, great, you got to 90%, but only 40% of your workforce filled in the survey. What is going on here? What is the curious questions that we need to ask of the other 60%?
Karen, I'm struck as we have this conversation, and even the name of your firm, the Change Executive, and we're going to talk about how specifically you can help organizations navigate change. But is change leadership something that only executives do? What role and what degree of input should rank and file employees have? Is change a collaborative activity, a collaborative process, or do a relatively few smart, well-resourced people kind of figure it out and let other people know what's going to happen? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do everything from working with executives in the C-suite to running webinars for whole company, shop floor workers, right through to all ranks around change leadership. Because leadership for me is about understanding that inner journey. So we do have choices as individuals on how we adapt to change and how we can change our language, for example. So I definitely feel that everyone is a change leader. So you asked about the change executive and where that comes from. It's quite a play on words, really, because for me, executive is about the executive function of the brain. The executive function of the brain is that front bit that does all the thinking and the cognitive awareness. So it's engaging our brains for change. You can be a change executive, whoever you are. It's just using the executive function of our brain in order to really be on the side of change rather than be fearful of it. It's a good thing. Opportunities open up. Every time there's a change, there's an opportunity. When I look at my own business through COVID, and that beautiful office you're talking about, it's empty. It hasn't had life in it for 2 years. I nearly had to give it up because of the financial outlay. But you know what the opportunity was? I learned some great skills. You wouldn't have got me in front of this microphone probably 2 years ago. It would have all been face to face. And you can reach more people this way. So I always see opportunities with change, and I just wish more people would kind of walk with it and keep it as a constant. It's a much healthier way of looking at it.
Karen, a lot of my listeners are frontline leaders, folks in the trenches who may lead a team of 6 or 8 or 10 people. What's some advice you would give them? They're in an organization that is experiencing change. Their department is being restructured. People are moving, coming and going. What advice would you have for that frontline leader, boots on the ground kind of person, about being a more effective change leader?
Okay. Advice. Okay. First advice would be stay awake, be alert, be switched on to what's happening. In her work, Susan David, in her book Emotional Agility, which is one of my favorites, she talks about emotion is data. So don't be afraid to think about how you're feeling. That almost sounds like a contradiction there. Think about how you're feeling, but that's what makes us human, right? We're able to think about our feelings. But stay awake and alert, not just to yourself, but to others. And I would say, don't be afraid to listen and ask the questions. Stay curious to what's possible. Stay really curious around what's possible in the moment. Second piece of advice I would give is integrate, into what you're doing. Don't add stuff. It's really scary when more things get added because of the change. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes we have a temptation to go, right, we need to do this now, and we need to do this, and we need to do this. Just relax more. Look at the flow of how your organization runs. And if you already have weekly meetings, then use that weekly meeting as an opportunity to just kind of talk about your context. What are you noticing? What's changing? How are people feeling? Go with the flow of what you have and use it as an opportunity to really get ahead of what's changing. And you will never have all the answers because it's always there. So don't be afraid to not have the answers. I think one of the dangers is that we try and, how would I put this? We try and fix or save other people in service of trying to be supportive. But what we need to be is really with them rather than fix them. And curiosity and acceptance is a great change skill.
It really speaks to the importance of relationship. And it seems like every conversation I have on this podcast, that reality comes to light in some different way. To make change work, we need to be able to relate to people effectively. We need to listen to them. We need to have empathy. We need to be open to their ideas and share authentically what we're thinking. Be vulnerable. Those are all relational skills that I think and you and I have dedicated our lives and careers to helping people build those skills. So I'm just astounded by how, no matter what we're talking about, it always comes down to we need to have better relationships with our colleagues and coworkers.
Yep, I think it does pretty much come down to that. And stay aware, be real about what context, stay grounded in the context you're in today. I think sometimes we also hold on to the past and we try and give our view on how things should be to someone else. But every human brain is wired uniquely, as you and I know. And we just have to accept that everyone is different and everyone has a different way of looking at things. And we should stay curious and, like you say, build those strong relationships so that we can understand each other more.
Karen, can you give us an example or two of how you've worked with an organization? I love stories, and I think we learn from and remember stories in a very powerful way. So tell us a story about how you've worked with an organization and put all of these ideas into practice on behalf of transforming an organization, as you say, from the inside out. What has that looked like in your experience?
Well, it's 30 years, Mike, so we could be here all day. But let's just take one example of an organization, a not-for-profit organization that I worked with in Papua New Guinea. I actually lived there for 5 or 6 years, feel very fortunate to have done so. You know what? In terms of putting all of this into practice, I was in an environment where I had no knowledge, no skills in terms of that culture, cut adrift really in terms of having to transform where we were from where we needed to be. So, and I'll give you a really micro example because I think it's the small things that make the changes, not the big bravado platform moments. And I walked into the office on the first day and I saw a line of shoes outside of the office door. And I remember thinking, God, this is curious. And I went inside and everyone had bare feet as we were walking around. I was like, wow, I should have probably read up more on the culture here. But I thought, it's quite good that I can just ask people. It's a way to connect. And we started to talk about, why that is. And because people said, this is our work home. This is like home. And I was like, okay, so we treat work like home. And as we uncovered some of these conversations, there were some people that thought, well, no, I don't want to leave my shoes outside. So we had this conversation about it. And then somebody said, I'll never forget it. My shoes were stolen last week and I'm not happy about that. I was like, oh, why would somebody steal your shoes if this was the culture in the organization, like in the country, not the organization? He said, I don't know, but I don't think we should leave our shoes outside. So I remember literally thinking to myself, having come from this Western white female privilege into this environment and going, wow, my first transformation action is, do we keep the shoes outside or not? But it was huge. It was a big thing. And collectively, we truly did decide as a team that we would not do it. And it would mean that people wouldn't get their shoes stolen and people could wear their shoes inside. And also the dynamic became, this is place of work. This is not place of home. And we were changing the way that we were working. So that if I had gone in and gone, right, someone's shoes are stolen, so no more shoes outside, it would have been my decision without any recognition for what was truly going on for people. And that took a long time to achieve a tiny change, which had a massive impact.
Yeah, small things can represent very big things. And it's important to do small things well if we ever want to do great things together. So thank you for sharing that story. Karen, time flies when you're having a great conversation. I want to give you a chance to do two things. Tell my listeners how they can get in touch with you. And also, if there's anything you'd like to invite them to consider doing, any resources you have for them, ideas, this is your chance to let people know what cool things you can do with and for them.
Okay. So you can get in touch with me via the website at changeexec.com. If you just email Karen@changeexec.com, you can get me there. In terms of, or follow me on LinkedIn, Karen Simmons. I have my own views. I also have a page, which is the Change Executive, but occasionally I'll speak about other things in life. So follow me on LinkedIn. In terms of what we do and what I'm really passionate about, we have a unique process for breaking down silos. You and I, Mike, have talked about relationships and it's how building those powerful coalitions in organization is so important. So if you're interested in peer coaching networks, building those within organizations, the other thing we do, which is pretty cool, is that we do what I call opportunity reviews. So this is where we go into an organization and we actually look for opportunities to change. So we identify where you're getting stuck. Is it a process? Is it a practice? Is it the way people work around here? Or is it your structure that maybe needs tweaking? No big wholesale stuff. Just where are your opportunities to change and improve, based on that mantra of staying constantly alert to where you can change. So I think they're two cool things that we do, which really, they don't cost a lot in terms of time or money, but they have a huge impact on changing the trajectory for an organization.
I love it. Karen, thank you for being such a great guest. I believe we all want to come visit you in Sydney when travel restrictions are lifted. Australia is one of my favorite places in the world. I've had the chance to go there on several occasions, and it is a beautiful place. So, Karen, you may have a lot of Americans down there knocking on your door looking for a cup of tea or cup of coffee or something. So, everyone, and Karen, thank you for being part of this podcast. And I hope you join us again for another interesting conversation. I'm Dr. Mike, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.